Eighth graders, how you doing? Mr. Garnett Cook. Hope you're all having a good weekend as we're heading into June. And on that note, I want to say that it is. I am very much aware of the fact that our time is growing very short, and my goal over the next couple of weeks, or last couple of weeks, is to give you as much of the history of the World War II era as I can in a very short amount of time. So I just want to acknowledge that our time is nearing its conclusion. And we'll do the best we can with the time we have left. The focus of this week's work is going to be the Nazi Party in Germany and the coming of World War II. And you're going to be there are two different areas of focus there. One is the Nazis coming to power in Germany in 1933 and how they consolidated their power. And part of that story is how they isolated groups of people in Germany, especially Jews, and essentially redefined what it meant to be a German. And you'll learn a little bit more about that this week in a reading that you're going to do. And then there is their military expansion, and they're spreading throughout Europe in the years leading up to the beginning of World War II in 1939. I want to begin with a couple of images here. These are some Nazi propaganda posters from the 1930s. And I want to point out a couple of things that are worth noting just in terms of imagery, because it speaks a lot to the kind of image that Germany, or that the Nazis were trying to sell to Germany and to the rest of the world. I want to start with this poster in the middle. So you see it here. This is a poster of Adolf Hitler. And you see here Adolf Hitler appears in the foreground. In the background is what looks to be a legion of loyal Nazis, all carrying their flags with a swastika on it. You can see the heavens are kind of parting and what looks like an eagle soaring above them. And the image here and the message is sort of a new dawn for Germany with the rise to power of the Nazi Party. This is what is called a Hitler Youth poster. So, the Nazis, when they were in power, established youth programs for boys and girls, designed essentially to mold them into being good Nazis. And you see here the image of the blonde-haired boy, representing the ideal German, staring off into, staring off into the distance somewhere. You can see the image of Hitler right behind them, looking in the same direction. And the idea here is that the young people are going to carry on the message long after Hitler's generation is gone. Hitler really believed that the key to maintaining Nazi power in Germany was essentially indoctrination of the youth, and they set in a whole program designed specifically for that purpose. I want to give you a timeline because there are a couple of stories happening simultaneously in Germany in the 1930s. One story is the buildup of German military power and economic power leading up to the start of World War II. The other is the beginnings of what will become the Holocaust, the murder of 11 million people by the Germans, 6 million of whom is estimated to have been Jews in Europe. And the paving of that really began in the 1930s. And I want to give you just a couple of key dates because in a couple of these you'll learn a little bit more about this week. Start with January 30th, 1933. Hitler was appointed what is known as Chancellor of Germany. So in the German government in 1933, there were the two highest offices in the government were the German Chancellor and the German President. The Chancellor was kind of like a prime minister. So Hitler did not have total power when he first came to power in Germany. The Nazi Party was the majority party in Germany in 1933, and they got to choose the chancellor, and that person became Hitler. At that time, there was a Jewish population in Germany of about 566,000. In August of 1934, the German president, von Hindenburg, died. And at that point, Hitler was essentially given the title Fuhrer. And Führer kind of means leader. He essentially became, at that point, Germany's sole leader. In 1933 and 34, through a series of actions, some legal, some not legal, the Nazis succeeded in marginalizing every other political party. And Hitler essentially was given the powers of a dictator in 1934. And this is the beginning of what will be for a brief period of time the rise of Germany as to be becoming what it will become, which is one of the most feared powers in Europe leading up to World War II. In 1935, you'll learn a lot more about these this week in the reading you're going to do. A series of laws called the Nuremberg Laws were passed. And these were laws that were designed to redefine what it meant to be a Jew in Germany. Jews are going to be stripped of a lot of their rights of citizenship, the right to own property, um, the right to run for public office, certainly. You couldn't marry a Jew, or Jews cannot marry people of other what they called races. They actually redefined being Jewish as a race, as opposed to a religion, and treated them that way in the law. This is, if you're looking at a big sort of turning point moment, September 15th, 1935, the passing of the Nuremberg Laws is the first sort of real turning point. In August of 1936, you had the Olympics in Berlin. And this was, for Hitler, this was his chance to showcase the new Germany to the world. He was trying to promote globally the new Germany, and that the Nazis were really bringing Germany back from the deficit it sunk to in the 1920s after the First World War. It was a chance to showcase this new power. Of course, some of you who know this story also know that Jesse Owens, the African American track and field star from the United States, actually outshined a lot of the German athletes, won 4 gold medals at the 1936 Olympics. In November of 1938, we had what was known as Kristallnacht, otherwise known as the Night of the Broken Glass. This was an uprising throughout parts of Germany, specifically targeting Jews and Jewish-owned businesses. It's an outbreak of violence that is another really important turning point in the history of Jews in Germany. One of the optional assignments you'll have this week is there's a link to a short reading about Kristallnacht that you can so you can learn a little bit more about it if you're interested. You'll find that on modules. Anyway, another part of the story this week is the story of German expansion. And what you see here in this maroon, this color here, this is the boundary line of Germany that was established by the Treaty of Versailles. And that Germany was limited to in the 1920s and into 1933 when the Nazis came to power. What you see here are areas that Germany will either take by force or will take through, I guess you could call it negotiation. I mean, in some places there were resistance, in some there was very little resistance. But Germany is going to start to flex its military muscle. By 1935 and 1936, Germany is rebuilding a very strong military force. Important point is that they were doing that in violation of the Treaty of Versailles, which limited the size of the army that Germany could have. Students have asked me in the past, well, if Germany was building up their armed forces and they were in violation of the treaty, why didn't the victorious powers go in and enforce the treaty? The short answer to that question is that's a darn good question. The long answer is there is probably a combination of fear and also a strong desire on the part of all European nations to avoid the outbreak of another war. It's important to remember that in the 1930s, the memories of World War I still loomed large in the minds and in the psyches of the people of Europe, and they were desperate to avoid another conflict like that. Unfortunately, and perhaps ironically, by trying to avoid it, they may have, we'll never know for sure, they may have ensured that it was going to happen because Nazi power and growth was left unchecked through most of the 1930s until we got to September 1st, 1939. That was the year Germany invaded Poland. Part of what would become the independent nation of Poland had been part of Germany up until the Treaty of Versailles. So the Nazis justified the invasion of Poland as essentially taking back territory that they thought rightly belonged to them. But this was a turning point because this was the point at which the other powers of Europe were going to finally stand up and say, okay, no more. And 2 days after the invasion of Poland, Great Britain would declare war on Germany. That would initiate World War II in Europe. Problem was that by the time this had happened, the German military machine had grown so big and so powerful that the other major powers of Europe did not have the resources to effectively oppose them. And we'll get to this next week. The first year and a half of the war in Europe really is dominated by the Germans because they had built up such a strong military force that had gone unchecked by other European powers. That now, perhaps at least at this point, they seemed too strong to be able to stop. And we'll come back to that next week. So you'll this week you'll have a chance to learn a little bit more about life in Nazi Germany, what they did to really grow their power and to isolate, in particular, German Jews. And then you'll also be learning a little bit more about German expansion leading up to the beginning of World War II in 1939. We'll stop there for today. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend in week 8th grade. Take care.